Hey there, I am back with another deck review, and today we're going to be looking at Sherlock Holmes, the January deck in the King's Wild Shorts line. And King's Wild Shorts is the fantastic subscription service from King's Wild Project and designer Jackson Robinson, where they do a different deck every single month for their subscribers. Some of the best designs from King's Wild come out of the shorts line, so if you haven't checked it out before, I really recommend it. But in 2021, we're going to see a little bit of a theme. A lot of the decks, not all of them, but a lot of the decks are going to be a continuation of a literary series that Jackson's been working on for a long time. We saw the start of this with a couple of decks back in 2020 with Robin Hood and Beowulf, but now we're going to see a lot more of them in 2021, and we kick it off in January with Sherlock Holmes. Now, this is also a bit of a throwback deck. Way back in 2013, Jackson put out a Kickstarter for the Sherlock Holmes decks. Several different versions of the deck went on to become super popular and some of his most valuable collector's decks. So very exciting to see that classic line of decks kind of pulled forward for a new generation of collectors. Sherlock Holmes is a great character to use for the literary series. He was originally created by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle in the 1887 novel A Study in Scarlet, but went on to be a part of 4 different novels and 56 different short stories. Sherlock is, of course, well known for his legendary observation and deductive reasoning skills that he would use to investigate tons of different cases across all those stories. And he would also go on to be portrayed a lot of times, dozens of times in popular media going forward. He's been played by 85 different actors. He was recognized by the Guinness Book of World Records as the most portrayed literary human character in history. So a lot of rich cultural history behind Sherlock Holmes. But let's get into the new deck from the shorts line. All right, starting with the tuck case. It's done on this beautiful matte finish stock in this off-white cream color, and it's covered with embossing and then a little bit of foiling just on the word Sherlock here, but the rest of it is done in this sort of copper or bronze colored ink. Really light embossing gives it a great feel to the tuck overall. You have the name of the deck, Sherlock Holmes, in big bold letters across the front, kind of a Victorian style to it. The silhouette of Sherlock Holmes with his trademark pipe and hat there at the bottom, and then a really ornate framing all the way around with very Victorian inspired elements. You have the circular frame around the silhouette of Holmes down there, and then the larger rectangular frame around the outside. But very ornate, lots of scroll work and detailing, light embossing just to amp it up that much more. A beautiful look to it, almost has a sepia feel to the whole thing. I really like the color scheme that's done on the front of this one. And I like that it didn't overdo it with the foil on this, just a little bit of it. Turning to the side, you get a little bit more foil with the Sherlock Holmes written down one side and the other. Bottom has some pretty simple ad copy for Jackson Robinson, King's Wild Project, and it mentions that these are printed by the Expert Playing Card Company in China. The top here, you got Sherlock Holmes one more time, similar to the sides. And then the back here is going to be a representation of the back design of the cards, but done with some nice embossing to fit with the rest of the tuck case. So you open up the inner flap here, you get a little bit more leaf work or vine work, whatever you want to call it there. Number 13, something you'll see reference on a lot of Jackson Robinson's decks. This is kind of a personal signature of his. And then number 13 on the inner flaps as well. And nothing printed on the inside, but you can see the reverse of that embossing there. So that is the tuck case. Absolutely fantastically done. Not sure if these were actually done by Clove Street Press. It feels like a Clove Street Press tuck case, and it's got that mark of quality, but I'm not 100% sure who did the tuck cases. Just gonna guess that it's Clove Street Press, but great job on those. But let's get into the cards, and we'll start with the back design. And here it is. Very similar, but with more color to it to what we were looking at on the back design, or the back of the tuck case. But you have the silhouette of Sherlock Holmes, and then surrounded by ornate Victorian style framing, lots of leaves running up the sides as well. And it's done, all of that framing is done in a series of metallic foiling throughout. In multiple colors it comes across. So like you'll see a little bit of silver here on the side. You'll see more gold elements like on the 221B nameplate over there on the side. That nameplate, by the way, is a reference to 221B Baker Street, which is where Sherlock Holmes lived. But then as you go through the rest here, you'll see bits of gold and even bronze foiling. So multiple colors coming out in here, giving just a rich feel overall. I'll say for me, especially given the fact that I really like the antique kind of look of the tuck case, I could have probably done with a little bit less foil here, but the foiling on cards is not uncommon for Jackson Robinson decks these days. He's been doing that on most of his decks lately, just really been experimenting with foiling. So I think it's super well done. I love the mixture of colors on this one. I just think that for the deck theme, maybe could have used less foil. But there is the back design. Going to the cards themselves, and we'll start out with the two jokers. They're two very different jokers. One of them features that silhouette of Sherlock Holmes once more, again framed by multiple colors of foil, that bronze and gold foil forming an emblem behind him. And then it has "the game is afoot," bit of a famous saying from him as he would go off on a hunt. And then where you normally see Joker in the corners, replaced by trademark magnifying glass. And the other card's an interesting one. This one depicts a scene that you would see on the front of a magazine called the Strand magazine. This was one that was printed in the late 1800s and into the 1900s, and several of, if not most of the short stories of Sherlock Holmes actually appeared in this magazine. So nice touch to give a nod to the magazine. And this is straight off of one of the covers. And if you look over here on the panel where you would normally see some of the authorship information of the magazine, instead it mentions these are illustrated by Jackson Robinson and King's Wild Project. So that's it. Those are the two jokers. Then we get into the cards. There's only one power ace, and that's the Ace of Spades. Features a woodblock style image of Sherlock Holmes puffing on his pipe there in the middle. And then lots more, again, foiling forming most of the rest of the design. Multiple colors, that yellow gold as well as the orangish bronze color. And you get the nice big spade pip, very ornate work all the way through. And then this frame around the edge. It's an interesting look to the frame, almost has a steampunk look at it when you get it at a glance. Very Victorian era finishes as you go all the way around, but beautifully done frame all the way on the outside. I will say that foil, it's a little bit tough to catch on camera. That's why you'll see me kind of tilting it here, trying to get it in the light just right. So if you look at it head on, it almost all looks black, but then you catch that light and that foil really gets a chance to gleam. So there's your Ace of Spades. The number cards all feature that same big bold frame. You'll see the spade pip here, just another indication that it's a spade. The index and the pip and index in the corner are also framed in, but fairly easy to read there. And then you have spade pips in the center that are all outlined in silver metallic. So again, heavy use of metallics all the way through these number cards. Every single card in this deck pretty much has foil on both sides of the card. So very ornate look. The big thick frame around the edge really kind of condenses the pips in the middle. So it starts to feel maybe a little bit crowded as you get to the higher numbers, but it's a super ornate and beautiful look. As you go to the red cards, now the black pips replaced with red that are this time outlined with kind of that gold color foil. And so there are your diamond pips, and then into your clubs. So the clubs, black outlined with silver, and then the red cards are red outlined with gold. And finishing up with the hearts. So that is the look at the number cards, but let's talk a little bit about the court cards. And as you might have guessed, the court cards are going to feature characters from the story of Sherlock Holmes. And of course, who else would we put on the King of Spades but Sherlock himself? You'll see all of them are done in this, again, kind of woodblock style. You can see the individual lines that you might find on a woodblock carving. beautifully done in that black and white look, and then features a portrait style view of Sherlock, again with the pipe in his mouth. This is actually the exact same image that was featured on the Ace of Spades. It's done in two ways, so it's kind of reversed on the other side of the card to form that really ornate court card. I like the art style of these of the illustrations there in the middle. But there's Sherlock Holmes, of course, on the King of Spades. King of Clubs features his partner, Dr. John Watson. This was his best friend, his assistant, and also the narrator, actually, of most of the stories. You'll see his name. That's easy to recognize. I like this addition to add the name of each one of the characters, because as we go on, some of these characters are going to get really obscure. So it's nice to have a little cheat sheet there and be able to tell who all the characters are. The Jack of Spades. This is Inspector Lestrade, who was a Scotland Yard detective. Frequently worked with Sherlock Holmes on a consulting basis. So he would consult Sherlock on a lot of the different cases. Queen of Spades features Mrs. Hudson, never given a first name, but she was the landlady of 221B Baker Street. So she plays a minor role in some of the stories. King of Diamonds. This is Mycroft. Not many people know that Sherlock had a brother, but Mycroft Holmes was actually said to be even better at deduction and observation than Sherlock was. He just didn't like the field work, so he never went out and solved crime the way that his younger brother did. But there is Mycroft Holmes. Going to the Queen of Hearts. This is an interesting one. This is Irene Adler. She only appears in one story, but was said to be greatly admired by Sherlock Holmes. Not in a romantic way or anything, but if you look at some of the future depictions, like in movies and things like that, when the movie wanted to pick out a love interest for Sherlock Holmes, this was usually who they would pick. So not depicted as a love interest in the stories themselves, but in a lot of the movies, Irene Adler is indeed the love interest. The Queen of Clubs. So we saw Sherlock Holmes' love interest, I guess you call it, but let's take a look now at his partner, John Watson, his wife. This here is Mary Morstan, or Mary Watson, the wife of Dr. John Watson. So she gets her appearance on the Queen of Clubs. The Queen of Diamonds. This is an interesting one. It's just labeled the Gracious Lady. This actually comes from one of the stories where Holmes went off to Windsor, and when he returned, he had an emerald tie pin, this really fancy tie pin. And when he was asked, I believe by Watson, where he got the tie pin, he just said it was a gift from a certain gracious lady. Turns out that lady was actually Queen Victoria. And so you see Queen Victoria with her crown depicted there, and she's just mysteriously labeled as the Gracious Lady. I love that he didn't put the name there and instead put Gracious Lady. I think it's a great touch. Now, the deck also features some of the bad guys. Of course, Holmes is solving crimes, so we get 4 cards that feature some of the villains through the entire story. First here we have Roylott. This is Grimesby Roylott, comes from a story called The Adventure of the Speckled Band. And it was said he was fond of exotic animals, and actually even had a highly venomous Indian swamp adder, a type of snake that he used as part of a murder plot. And so he has this kind of goofy look on his face, complete with that swamp adder wrapped around his head. There is Grimesby Roylott. And then this one, Milverton, who's a blackmailer featured in a story called The Adventures of Charles Augustus Milverton. He was the king of blackmailers, and according to the story, this, above all of the murderers and things like that that Sherlock Holmes saw, this was the man who actually repulsed him the most because of what he did as a blackmailer. So Milverton, very hated by Sherlock Holmes. Here on the Jack of Hearts, we have Colonel Sebastian Moran. He was said to be the second most dangerous man in all of London. And the most dangerous? Well, that would be this one, the King of Hearts, Moriarty. This was Moran's boss and a little bit of a infamous character in the Sherlock Holmes stories. According to the stories, he was known as the Napoleon of crime, and apparently killed Sherlock Holmes during a fight in one of the more famous of the stories. And in a lot of the later adaptations, when you see him in film and things like that, Moriarty is basically Sherlock's arch enemy. So very infamous amongst all of the villains. Most dangerous man in London, the Napoleon of crime, is Moriarty. I love the kind of nebbish look that he's got there, just this kind of balding man. Doesn't look all that intimidating, but in the stories of Sherlock Holmes, he is indeed an intimidating figure. So that's it. That is the court cards. Beautiful depiction. I love the characters he picked from the stories. There's a lot of them obviously to pick from, but I thought he did a great job with the illustrations on these. Now, what about handling? Well, this has been an interesting subject in the King's Wild decks as of late. And I'll say this is another interesting evolution. If you've seen some of my other videos or seen some of the other King's Wild decks, you'll know that as Jackson's been experimenting with the two-sided foiling on the cards, he's also been experimenting with different stocks from Expert Playing Card Company. And some of his previous decks, most notably the Robin Hood deck, were super, super thick decks. This one's actually done on a new stock though, their cardistry stock. So it's a good bit thinner than the Robin Hood deck, but it's still a pretty thick deck, thicker than your average deck. And I gotta say, for a cardistry stock, it does not fan especially well. It's definitely clumpy for me. They feel like they have good slide to them when you're holding them in your hand, but if you try to fan them, it just does not work. So not the best handling deck in the world, but it is interesting. Now, I mentioned the thickness of these. So I did the old magic orthodoxy trick, pulled out a caliper, set of calipers, measured 10 of these in a caliper. These came in at 3.23 millimeters for 10 cards. Now, for comparison, the Robin Hood decks, which were pretty legendarily thick, came in at 3.43 millimeters, so about 7-8% thicker. But if you compare this to like the USPCC printed one of the original decks from the Sherlock series, they were kind of on a regular stock. Those were only 2.9 millimeters. So a big thickness difference. You know, you'll see most decks are in that under 3 millimeters. This one's 3.23. And while a good bit thinner than Robin Hood, still a kind of fat deck. But that is it. That is the handling discussion, I guess you would say, on Sherlock Holmes. Now, that is only one version of the deck. This is the standard edition version. Very beautiful deck. I also get the limited edition version. Give you guys a quick peek at the tuck case. Now, the cards inside are exactly the same. That's why this one's sealed. But you do get a different tuck case, and it's done on this really interesting slate gray color. Almost like a slab of concrete. Has a little bit of foil here, kind of a grayish silver foil with the word Sherlock up here. And then embossing throughout. I will say, I wish the contrast of color had been a little bit higher on this one. I wish these raised parts had maybe been a little bit darker, because depending on the light, this can look super washed out. But it is still a beautiful design all the way around, and you'll see it's numbered. Past years have had a little bit lower numbering. This year, all of the limited decks are gonna be numbered to 600. So I get number 265 out of 600. So that's the limited edition version of the deck. Honestly, I prefer the tuck from the standard version. So if you're gonna pick one up, I'd pick this one up. Now, what would I use the deck for? Well, I think it's a great collector's deck. That's really gonna be first and foremost. I think it'd be an interesting deck to use for gameplay. Wouldn't recommend it for Magic or cardistry. It's a little bit too flashy for that. Honestly, it's a little bit flashy for gameplay too, but it can be a fun way to kind of spice up your gameplay. But that's it. That is the look at Sherlock Holmes. Make sure to subscribe for more deck reviews and unboxings, and let me know what else you want to see. And go check out the link in the description if you're interested in signing up for the King's Wild shorts yourself. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you for the next one.